Fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it! Fix it, fix it, fix it!
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's your boy Jamsys, and we're doing something a little bit different today. I was kind of tired of RTA after last season, so I'm just trying to do a bit things different. And I always wanted to cover like these patch changes, so I thought like, why not try in preseason when there's nothing too exciting going on? So let's get into it. We have a list of units here, and the artifact changes. There's a unit that I thought would be on here that isn't, which is LMAO. Kind of interesting because Death Dealer Ray and MO Leica both got changes, like almost hotfix speed before their banner ran out. And MO is worse than both of them combined, I think. But you know, like I'm not on the balance team. But I'm sure they have their own reasons, and I am excited to see a few of these characters and see how they got buffed, so let's get into it. So the first unit we have is LQC. This is kind of like a strange buff in my opinion because LQC is already used in like all tiers of play. She's mainly used at one-shotting hand guys or one-shotting APOCs with attack buff, and she's quite good at it. And she's already gotten indirectly buffed recently due to the release of Benny Maru's artifact, now that it kind of gives her an immunity set and a continuous attack buff throughout the match. So I'm kind of confused as to why they would buff her. And they kind of buffed her in a way where it's just like, it makes her better at what she did before, which is like blowing up dark units, which I guess is like cool and fun. But it would have been nice to see like, to make her a bit more of a generalist DPS, I guess, where she's like slightly better against cleave, or she's better at these like CC environments, which is what she really struggles against, which is like understandable. But I guess that like being a specialized unit in itself is not a bad thing. They just made her better against dark units, so good for her, I guess. But she already works, so what is the reason for this buff out of 10? But yeah, moving on. The next unit is Celine. She really did need buffs to a few things, and one of them was that her S1, even with her S3 possession buff, was too RNG, and not getting the empowered attack really hurt because it did a lot more damage than her regular S1. So that's changed to 100%, which I think is really nice. And one of the other problems she had was that she falls into a very unique circumstance where her only viable sets were a fast anti-cleave variant or anchor 1v4 type of unit on lifesteal. And the anchor 1v4 on lifesteal was very difficult to build because she wanted speed and damage but no bulk. So getting that like very specific gear was very difficult. So passive, like making her S3 possession buff recover more health may be very significant if it allows you to forego lifesteal set because you heal that much. But these changes are like very nice, like quality of life out of 10, but I doubt we're gonna see more Spirit Celine in the meta just because she's hard countered by a lot of these like common meta units such as like Senya, Karina, Landy, Stenny, debuff units, Carrot, even like Sylvan Sage Vivian 1v1s her. But if she is picked in the 4 or 5 position, it's because she has 1v4 potential, because you pick like too much single target without uncountable soul burns or whatever. And she is a force span in those situations. So she's just better in her role overall. But a lot of the time she's going to be force spanned out. So I don't see her making too much of an impact on the meta. We're going to move on to Jacko, which is the unit I'm most excited to see in this balance patch. They kind of made it so that she functions as another bridge for a few openers such as C. Lilius or Lua. And they just made her more consistent overall because she no longer needs a stun and she can function off any debuff. So she works infinitely better with Ran or Peyra or like other openers that can hit multiple units such as Futica. So that's pretty nice. They increased her damage overall on her S3, which is pretty good, and they gave her added utility on the S3 where if you kill something, you push up. And if you combine this with like Merciless Gun, you can get like a 32% push, which is pretty good for the team. However, she still falls into a difficult spot in the meta somewhat because she's countered by Ran or Peyra or other fast blue units. And being a debuff oriented unit, it does mean that sometimes she is just going to be unreliable, because if your opener doesn't land a debuff on the unit you're trying to kill with S3, the damage dealt is much lower because she really relies on that debuff again. But I think she will be a unit to try out in the future when the buff hits, because she'll finally be C. Lilius' second bridge unit, and it'll be fun to do a lot of damage with S3 and her fun voice lines. Moving on to Summer Break Charlotte. This was a unit that we didn't really see too much of. We saw more of her artifact, which became best in slot for a lot of these damage dealing knights that didn't want like Elbrus or something. They did make her a lot better in a lot of ways. They gave her more critical hit chance, which is pretty good because it alleviates her stat building, because technically she wants like every stat, and in today's meta that's kind of an archaic requirement, especially when you have low base attack on an attack scaling unit. But they did help her and give her a lot of quality of life changes. Overall, they made it so that her S1 AoE dual attack pushes her up more. Her S3 is fighting spirit required, so you might be able to get a lot of value out of it with certain teammates such as C. Lilius or A-Rods that can constantly drag her, so she might be able to S3 multiple times. Her S3 is also importantly changed to be less of an execute and more of a threatening nuke that just penetrates 50% def pen base, and more importantly, it's changed so that she can cleanse herself. So she's no longer hindered by like a lot of these debuffs such as attack down, hit chance down, and other debilitating debuffs that like she has a harder time shaking off because she's slower. And yeah, I think we'll basically see her in the meta like Ilynav, where if she's a good pick into a team of fire units that debuff you, or like if you need like solid DPS for Steny, I think she might be able to work with that. So I think I'm gonna rate these changes like an Ilynav out of 10. Moving on, we have Sharun. She's kind of a giant meme. She falls into the category of like, she doesn't lean into what she wants to do. She isn't like an all-out Venom unit, but she isn't like an anti-buff unit either. And they kind of just buffed the anti-buff non-healing Soul Weaver aspects of her kit, where she strips off 2 turns of buffs, which is basically all the buffs except for Dien and Handguy Soulburn, which is really good. But her S2 changes are really good also, because now the buff is for 2 turns, and the unit with the highest attack means a DPS, and a DPS built on low crit chance just doesn't exist in Epic 7. So getting rid of the critical chance buff is pretty good, and continuous healing I think is a hit or miss, because a lot of these DPS units are squishy, so it's like kind of hard to say if that 15% healing was going to help you or not. But it's now changed with more like proactive buffs such as immunity or speed, which helps you cycle, which is pretty good. But I think her largest issues are largely unchanged, where she isn't like a Venom unit, but she's not like a disruption buffing unit either. So I think she's not going to be used too much. So I think this is like a missed the mark out of 10 for me. Next, we're moving on. We're going to move on to the most popular character in episode 4, at least until she was released, and then people saw that she was trash. They change her so that she does more damage, like in general, but again, this is like an Epic 7 balance patch, so they don't really tell you by what percent, which I think is pretty weird. But they do remove her self-attack buff, and I think this is actually a positive change because it makes it so that she has a higher damage ceiling. Because previously, even with attack buff, she struggled to kill like these really tanky units behind a barrier such as Senya or Shu, because it was really hard to increase her damage. You only had like vigor or attack imprints. But now that she benefits from like external attack buffs, hopefully she'll fit her role better as a tanky bruiser that threatens kills on units behind barriers. And the change where her S3 resets makes it so that it's a little bit better against that too. One criticism is that I think her S3 should pierce damage share, because one of the main shield units are Ariel and FCC, or like even Eden or Carmen on protection set, and they all run like damage share of some sort, and that might hinder her ability to actually kill the unit through a barrier, but we'll have to see when the multipliers come out. The next change is to Asscart. He was a meme unit before the changes, and he's a meme unit after the changes. It just means that you can get 90% evasion on Rylet or Aiden, but there's a lot of counters to that style of gameplay. So this is probably only going to be used in some meme situations like Guild War Attack or clickbait videos if you're Grass Angel or whatever. But they did make him a bit more functional as a unit overall, where he can get the S1 provoke luck on enemy units by provoking them with his S1, and then they're forced to S1 into him. And since he has a passive where he dodges the first hit that's made on him every turn, he can push up and continue doing that. And his imprint concentration being switched to effectiveness really facilitates that, and it benefits his like death break on S3 and stun or whatever. But a largely unnoticeable change where it's like 4 fun out of 10 only. But yeah, it's the same. Like again, his passive gives him evasion on the first hit on him every turn. So like I don't know how useful this is, but we'll have. We're moving on to the artifact changes, which are much more disappointing overall than the units. Ilynav's artifact, they made it a bit more flexible where it doesn't have to be a single attack anymore, but I don't think this artifact is going to be used too much just because there's too much competition. Most damage knights opt to use Mature Sunglasses or Elbrus, and defensively they have like a wealth of options. Holy Sack even. Maybe we'll see this on like Mort or something if you ran out of the other artifacts. But I think knights are very, very limited in their artifact options. Like this is not going to get rid of Rocket Punch or anything else either. So it's kind of like an artifact that doesn't really have a best in slot character right now. Like even Ilynav currently would rather use Elbrus or Mature Sunglasses. Like, so we'll have to see if there's a unit in the future that's better able to use this artifact. And that's kind of how I feel about Sword of Winter Shadow. They made it so that you get souls, but it's not enough souls for it to like actually matter. Like if Rand uses this, it's not like he's gonna get enough souls to like immediately soul burn for free without book. So the uses are kind of limited. I honestly saw this artifact have use before the buffs, where like anti-cleave Payres, where you pick them 4/5, will use this to shut down souls. And this change is like kind of weird because like the first half of the artifact where it says like increases attack by 15% says that you want to use this on like a damage unit, but what damage unit would want to use this on top of ones that like have a non-attack skill? Like Winter doesn't care about attack, doesn't really care about souls either. Payra and Rand want other stuff. They want like RNL or like damage artifacts if you're Rand, or RNL if you're Payra. Celine, I think she has better options with like Dust Devil or even like the armament for like defensive play. So I largely think this artifact doesn't have a home right now, but that's just because there's not a lot of non-attack skill using Thieves. So like I guess we'll have to wait and see in the future. Out of 10. Iron Fan. This is a change that needed to happen because it used to be the worst artifact in the game by a long mile. But they changed it, and in a way that is actually pretty good for Green Bellona's kit, where if you use a non-attack skill, you get like a significant amount of CR push. But you know how I said night artifacts are pretty tight competition if you're a damage dealer. For rangers, it's like that times 100. The first ranger artifact that's used a lot is Guiding Light, and that's going to be the artifact on an overwhelming amount of rangers, and Iron Fan just does not compete against it. And then the other ranger artifacts that are used are damage artifacts such as Misha, or utility artifacts such as Sashay Thanhaise, and Iron Fan again does not compete with that. So I think while this artifact might be seen in some like PvE cases, because green Bellona is used in PvE, I'm not too sure we're gonna see this in PvP. Maybe a unit comes out down the line that's able to use this, but like that's with all the artifact changes, to be honest. But yeah, that's it. There wasn't too much in this balance patch. I was pretty excited about the units except for LQC, and there are some very promising changes in there such as Arunka, Jackal, and Spirit Eye Celine. So I'm pretty hyped for this balance patch to come out to test those, but I think for the artifacts it was pretty disappointing. I don't think there is any units that can actually make use of these changes, and we'll just have to see in the future if there's like an ML5 or something that comes out that makes better use of these artifacts. But yeah, that's it for today's video. Sorry for the delay. I ran into some technical difficulties and that's why it was so late. But as always, thanks, and I'll see you next time.